through from building a dev machine, so you've got your developer machine where everything's nice, to a large-scale data center driven space where we have this monster of hundreds of servers, potentially. So, this is basically going to be your first server, which you think it's kind of like, which is your dev machine. Now, it has all the prerequisites that you need on there. It's got SQL Server, it's got Sitecore, it's got Lucene, it's probably got an SSD drive because nothing else will run Sitecore these days. The key thing here as well is deployment's really easy. You can just go F5 mad, we just test it, deploy, or test, deploy, go and get coffee, come back, might boot it, do some work. So this is like the nice part. This is where it starts really well, and it starts to sort of get more complicated from here on out. So we've got a client, and they're a sort of smallish client. They're starting to build their new website, and they tend to do the type of solution. And this is going to be like probably like the first server setup you guys are going to come across. So we're going to have, for them, we've just got one front-end CD box. They haven't got a lot of money for about 47. They got a separate CM box for security purposes. You know, if you want to keep that content management environment probably in a separate security zone, not in a DMZ. And we've just got a SQL box here. They're not using DNS or any of the advanced features. It's purely just a brochure website. You can see there that the CD server is connected to the web. Ideally, you're going to have a file in between that. I've made the assumption that you are always going to have a file in between your web, and so I haven't chosen to show that in there. So, things start to get a bit more complicated. The client's growing now. They're getting a bit more traffic on their website. The CD server, the first CD server starts to slow down. So we want to introduce a second CD server. And so at this point, we start to make decisions now about how we're actually going to load balance the CD server. Now, if we're just building a brochure website, then this is a pretty basic decision. And we're going to use what's called round robin load balancing. Who's familiar with the term round robin load balancing? Okay. So for those of you who aren't aware of it, what round robin load balancing is that every request that comes into the server gets forwarded to a different server to the previous request. So if we've got two servers, it means that each request is just going to flip between each of those servers. Okay. Now, if we're just doing brochure website, okay, with no sort of personalization, with no user session or anything like that, we can do that all day. It doesn't matter. Split between the two. It's nice and easy. The other thing we need to address is how we're going to deploy. Now, we've got a few servers here at the moment, so it's pretty basic, it's pretty easy. So what we're probably going to be doing is Control V, Control C. Or the other way around, Control C, Control V, that works better. And we're just going to be probably copying and pasting files up onto the server. Now, some of you think, what? We're not using continuous integration or all this big stuff like a build, King City build server and Octopus deploy. This is a client with two servers. I'm guessing their budget is this one in the extent that. And a lot of Sitecore projects I've seen on the smaller varieties that are doing kind of copy and paste deployment. The nice thing we have about the setup as well, because we're round robin, we can take servers out of load. So, clients now, they're seeing the benefits of being on a Sitecore platform. They're seeing their traffic improving, they're seeing the users coming to their site, getting information, but now they actually want to start interacting with that user. They want to start getting information from it. And when you start having a user interact with your website, that's invariably going to mean that you're going to start storing something there. Like if you're using web forms marketers or multi-page forms, you're going to start checking things into the session. And as soon as you do that, probably means you're going to introduce sticky sessions at this point. Now, some of you might say, well, we could put it like a distributed network server or something like that. But again, is that appropriate for this scale of client? They've got two servers, traffic's not that big. In this kind of site size, probably best sticking with sticky sessions. Of course, that does bring some problems. With sticky sessions, first off, how do we pick something out of load? when you deal with a sticky session environment, you've got users coming in, and they're going to be targeting one server repeatedly. Now, if you take that box out of load and start deploying straight to it, whatever that person's doing in their session is gone. So if you've got users filling out multi-page forms, they can be halfway through page 2, and suddenly you rip the server from underneath them, and their journey is cut short. And this just isn't a great user experience. You know? Sitecore is all about the experience. So if we just tear a server from underneath someone, they're going to be pretty annoyed about it. So we have to do something that's called draining. Who's heard of draining servers? Okay, two. So the idea of the draining of the server is that you've taken it out of load, so the load balancer no longer forwards any new requests to that box. At this point, all the requests are going, all the new requests are going to the existing server in balance, but any existing requests are still being served by the old server. So it's still being processed on that session. And what we have to do is we have to wait until all the users are no longer active on the old server before we can start doing our deployments. Now you might think, well, how long do you have to wait for that? Well, that could actually be quite a long time in reality. Because if you've got a 20-minute session, then you should really be waiting for 20 minutes after the last user request. Because you don't know if the user is suddenly going to come back at minute 15 and come back onto that server. Unfortunately, most people don't really want to wait that long. You don't want to tell your client, we're going to deploy it. So when I'm going to see it live, maybe 2 hours, I'm not sure. So most people will wait a reasonable amount of time, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then just go. Another thing to consider when you're draining is how you decided to do your sticky sessions. Probably one of the most popular versions of sticky sessions is to use a cookie. So you place a cookie on the user's machine, and that cookie says, when I see it, I go to that machine. We've got a different cookie, I go to the other machine. It's quite simple. But if you've got more advanced scenarios, like I've seen one client where they were doing sticky sessions based on IP address. So everyone from one point of presence would go to one machine, from another point of presence they go to the other machine. That created several problems for them in the long run. One, if you're doing it based on IP, you've got no idea what volume of traffic from a single IP is going to do. So you could find that if you've load balanced on an IP, you've got 1,000 users off one IP address, but then 10 users off another IP address. One server is just getting pinged all the time, while the other server is hardly doing it. The other problem we found with deployments is that basically that IP address never became quiet long enough for us to actually take something out of load. Because it's always thinking you've got like 1,000 users, they're always visiting the website, it's just an absolute other. So unless you have a very particular business need, I will try and avoid using anything that is basically cookie based, where you can actually identify from the user. Okay, so I'll try to sort out the sticky session problem. They're happily running along on the website. It's been going, say, 6 months, no problems so far. You managed to keep it up 90% of the time, hopefully. 99% of the time, in reality, of course, never goes down. But the client thinks to themselves, what happens if a plane lands on the data center? What do I do in that scenario? All my servers have disappeared. And at this point, they say, oh, this is like a DR environment. Now, how many people are building DR environments for their clients? So, a DR environment like this, where we've got a replica of the existing server setup in a different data center. So you basically just duplicated it. How many people have built this? How many people are using have any kind of DR plan? I'm glad I can get a photo of that. That was shocking. Right. So this is quite common, and I used to do this. I used to recommend having a separate DR environment, and it's essentially a duplicate of our live environment. But this creates several problems for me. Firstly, what we find with DR environments like this is that the DR environment is always sort of sickly half of the main environment. Like people, they deploy to it, but quite often they may not deploy everything to it. It's not patched properly. People get to apply the hot fixes. How often do people actually test the DR process, failure process? No, I was working with quite large clients, and we would be lucky if we were able to test the DR failover process once every 6 months, once a year. The problem with that is that you don't know your DR process is going to work, because the firewall rules might have changed. The infrastructure guys, they're always tinkering with things. Suddenly they block access to that critical backend system that your DR environment is in this moment of need, and then the whole thing blows up and your DR environment is useless. There's also issues with bringing the DR environment up. So quite often, especially with something like Sitecore, you've got your content editors, they're updating everything in the live environment. And then at some point, you've got to take that live environment content and bring it across into your DR environment. Now, normally that could be done with mirroring. Some people set that up. Sometimes it's done with replication. I'm getting head shakes here. Some people even wait till the whole thing fails, manually take it back up, restore it, and then DR is back up and running in about a day. But there always tends to be, in this kind of setup, some delay between the live side going down in flames and the DR environment coming back up. So what's a better idea? Well, why would we have those servers sat there doing nothing? Let's bring them into the live environment. So they're connected, so we're forced to maintain them. They have to make up-to-date information. But if you lose one data center, so imagine everything at the top of the screen is in one data center, everything at the bottom of the screen is another data center. If that data center disappears, instantly you know the other data center is running and it's working. We have no worry about will it work, how long will it take to come back up, because we've found it's already working, it's already up. There are no issues. We know there's no issues because it's still running in live. And hopefully that will be seamless to your users. So I hope I've persuaded you don't do separate DR environments. Okay, so the next problem is now that we've merged these two environments together, we're starting to get quite a few front-end servers. Now I've got 4 CD servers here. You might have more. I'm working with a client who's got, I think, 50 CD servers. And we're still operating on sticky sessions. Now, if we take that rule about taking servers out of load, draining them, waiting until there's no users on the box, how long will it take me to take 4 servers out of load, upgrade them, and put them back into load? Day? No. If I do 10, 2 days? No. This isn't really a sustainable solution. We need to think about a better way of being able to manage our users visiting our website so that we can effectively do our deployments. So this is where we introduce the session server. Now, who's implemented the session server on their solution? Who's using SQL? Who's using the Mongo? Right. Okay. Anybody experimented with the more exotic ones like Redis and Memcache? No? So there is a Redis, I think there's a Redis Sitecore open source project at the moment coming in. I think just as a technical thing, I think the SQL one is still the recommended one. I think there are a couple of performance issues with the Mongo one, but I put Mongo in here. It's a different symbol. Wanted a different picture on there, really. Okay. So now that we have a session server, we've moved that critical piece of information about each user off the CD boxes and into a separate box itself. This means that we can now go back to using that nice little round robin implementation. That's what that's going to be, by the way, if anyone's wondering what that red thing is. So what does that mean? Well, that means we can just start killing boxes without having to worry about it. If you're working in a cloud environment, that's where you want to be. You want to be able to kill a box, bring a box up, kill a box, bring a box up. So by putting session elsewhere, we achieve that. But now we also have a lot of servers, and we need to start thinking more intelligently about how we actually deploy to these servers. We can bring one box down, deploy it, bring another box up, bring one box down, bring a box up. But we need to start planning more, because this is probably now becoming a larger solution with a larger client who actually cares about the user journey and doesn't want to break that user journey. Because every broken user journey, it may be costing them money. I mean, imagine you're on Amazon and you're halfway through the payment process, and Amazon decides to deploy, and suddenly the shopping cart's gone. And that Raspberry Pi that you wanted to buy, the Internet of Things stuff that you saw earlier, you've got to try to start again. So we're going to choose what we call blue-green deployment. So the idea of blue-green deployment is that we are going to divide our servers into two groups, a blue group and a green group. I'm picking two. This isn't really strictly limited to two groups. You could have as many groups as you thought necessary. You might divide your groups based on region, however you want to really break them up. So the idea of blue-green deployment is that we can deploy to one set of boxes, the blue boxes first, test on those blue boxes. Once we're happy with those blue boxes, we can introduce them back into load, take the green boxes out of load, and then deploy to the green boxes. And hopefully, because we've got our memory, separate memory server, this thing becomes seamless to the user. They don't notice that one box comes out and then other boxes come up. And they're now they're now on VNet rather than VLAN. That should be completely transparent to them. However, there are a few things we need to think about when we do blue-green deployment. Firstly, things like the templates changing. Now, if you can see in my first bit of code, I'm getting a model from Sitecore, and I'm reading its old field value. But in my new piece of code, I'm going to read the new field instead. So what would happen if I was to update the templates in Sitecore on my CM box, publish those templates out to the front end, because I'm deploying to my blue environment at the moment. But my green environment, which is on the VLAN, is still looking at the same database content. What's going to happen is that that page is going to blow up on the green environment, because suddenly the templates that it's looking at, the fields it's looking for, have changed, and they've been removed. So that VLAN code is looking for the old fields and not break user experience. So, to cope with that, we then need to split our SQL databases. So we introduced Web 1 and Web 2. Who's using multiple web databases in their solution? How many are using 2? 3? So, did they get 1 hand for 3? No. All right. Greater than 3, just in case you're greater than 3. But they've got 1 hand for 3. So now we've got 2 web databases. We want to associate a web database with each color. So we'd have one web database with the green group, one web database with the blue group. What this means is that when we deploy our templates to the CM environment, we can then publish those templates specifically to one web environment. So we deploy just to the web database that the blue box is looking at. That means that our green environment isn't going to be affected at all. We can then do our testing again on the blue environment, and then when we're happy, we'll put the blue environment back into load, take the green down, and then publish our template to the green environment. So we avoid blowing things up because we've made template changes. And that's a good example here of that. So you can see we've labeled up the groups and the associated databases. You can see Web 2 here is associated with green, Web 1 is associated with blue. But that's not the end of it, because we've just dealt with the data changes that are coming from the content management system, so from our side of it. But we also need to consider the data that's coming from the user So in this V last code here, you can see that we are reading just the name of the user. But in our V next piece of code, we now need to get not just the name of the user, but some other values that they filled in the form. Now imagine at this point, you're a user and you're on the VR section of the code and you're filling it in on your website. And then suddenly somebody deploys VNet. Now if you hit submit on your form's now going to go to a VNet server, but you are on a VLAN form. Stay with me. Right. When that gets processed by the server, your form is probably not going to have that form.values field because you are on the VLAN form. So at this point, your VNet code is going to blow up because your VNet code is going, I need that values field, and it's just not happening. It's not just not there. Okay. So we need to have a way of mitigating against this. So there are some ways, and there's some details, 3 ways of doing this at the moment. The first way is kind of feature toggling. Now, who's heard of feature toggles? Typically, with feature toggles, they tend to be referred to in the way that it's a developer's decision. In reality, what they're doing is they're writing some code in their code base, but it's not ready to go live. And because they're using like a graphic continuous integration system, where they may be checking in, building your straight to live, they may toggle features on and off that are ready to be deployed live. But we can also use feature toggling from the user's end as well. Now, how this might look is that when someone comes to your form, you might assign them a version number for that form. So you say, right, a hidden field somewhere, form version V1. When you upgrade to V2, you in your code you have a replication of the V1 code, but running alongside you also have a V2 code. And then because you've written V2 to the hidden field, users who come back and push back to your server with V2 go to the V2 form processing code. And those with the V1 hidden field will go to the V1 form. So this way we avoid that problem of somebody who was on V1 being processed by the V2 accidentally the correct data B. So we can kind of like a feature toggling from the user side. The second option is regression testing or backwards compatibility. So that was what the man writing on that donkey is backwards compatible, as we can see. So this is going to take sort of two phases in talking about. First off, we probably want to build up a set of integration tests. So not unit tests where you're just testing an individual method, does the individual method work. What we want to do here is create a test that actually scaffolds together controllers, services, data mapping tools, all those sorts of things, still in your sandbox environment. So you're not connecting to third-party services, but still in your sandbox environment. But it says, right, if I submit a form, a V1 form, against V2 code, what happens? What blows up? And by doing that, you should then be able to build up a suite of integration tests that allow you to test the backward compatibility of your new form as they're deployed. They shouldn't break, or you should at least find the breaking points a lot sooner. That does take a lot more work. You've got to scaffold up quite a bit of things. It takes a little bit of thinking about. You also have to make sure that your solution is correctly abstracted away, so you've got interfaces on controllers, you can mock the backend services, mock the databases. You can mock Sitecore if possible. I have a good solution for that, and wants to go that one. So that's one way. The second way we need to do is also create Selenium scripts. I say Selenium script, I mean any kind of UI dev tool. Who's using things like Selenium or is it WebDriver new one from my who's got dedicated testing? For those of you who haven't got dedicated testing, I would recommend getting dedicated testers who will build you Selenium scripts. Testers, I would say, are a very different mindset to developers. Firstly, they enjoy making developers life mission. My girlfriend, she is a tester, my girlfriend is a tester, so testing right. But these Selenium scripts, again, you should record the journey through your V1 form And then because you recorded that journey through your V1 form, when you do a V2 form, you can replay that journey and again regression test to make sure that that journey completes correctly without breaking the user experience. Again, it's just making sure that when you do that deployment to live, you're not kicking users. And you're making this is a lot of effort for a very small bit of time. But by doing this, we do make a better solution overall. You know, it has enough on effect down right. And finally, the sort of third way of possibly doing this is depending on how well controllable load balancer is, how much power it is, we can start to do phased traffic onto our new environment. So this is the point where we've upgraded the blue environment. It's now back in line. Both blue and green are running parallel, but rather than just direct everything to the blue environment that's just been upgraded, we can start directing, take 5% of traffic. And then we monitor the logs. We see if we see any bad behavior on our new environment. And as we become more and more confident, we slowly direct more and more traffic to that blue environment until all the traffic's on the blue environment, and we can safely remove the green environment from those and do the upgrade. So deployment in this scenario, I mean, it's not a simple task, but for large solutions, simple tasks, well, a simple solution is probably not going to be appropriate. Okay, so now our client has moved on. They now want to start using more search facilities. They've got a large content base. You know, they might be using separate buckets now, using buckets and that sort of thing. So now we need to implement search. Now before, up to this point, we go back, we've been using Lucene on each CD box. But as we all know, that doesn't really scale that well. Mostly because each CD server has to do its own indexing work. And if you've got 10, 15 CD servers, each of them doing their own indexing, just a waste of time. There's also the risk that you have in index inconsistency, because each box may fail at some point without you noticing it. If you want to do an index rebuild, how long that's going to take. So this is why Sitecore implemented the solar provider. So now we can take Lucene, throw it away, it served as well, but now it's time to move on. And we put in a solar box. It's unlikely to be one box. You probably want to look at solar cloud because it's going to need to be a resilient solution. It's almost a requirement that you have some sort of solar cloud setup because if solar goes down, Sitecore won't boot up. And then you get a horrible yellow screen of death saying solar's been did. So you've got solar in there. The next thing, they want to implement XDB. And then you get that, and you're like, what the hell? Yeah, we get a server explosion. So what we added here, well, we've added a Mongo instance to record our XDB data. We now have an analytics database. The reason we put the analytics database on a separate box is because when we start processing the XDB data, there's going to be a lot of writes to that analytics database. You don't want those writes impacting the performance of your CD server that trying to feed the information out. And again, we don't know what the query load might be as well when your content editors start browsing through the page analyzing those sorts of things. We need to offload that somewhere. We've got a processing server. You might need a couple of these depending on how much data your XDB instance is collecting. You might need 2, 3, 4 processing boxes. Which those boxes, they're going to scan your XDB data, munge it, and then put it into the analytics database. Here we've separated off the reporting server, which is another thing that you can do with Sitecore. The aim of the reporting box, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but now, as you ask for reports, as your content editor goes through the CM environment and they ask for reports from Sitecore, the query will be handed to the reporting server, who will then be responsible for going away, querying the different data sources, and then delivering back to the CM box the aggregated data to display to the user. So you can start to see it gets very complicated. You can also see I've tried to express there all the connections that each box will need. You know, who does it need to know about? Yeah, it's going to get really difficult to start keeping track of all these things. Okay, so now we're starting, we've got a big solution. Now we're starting to look at ways we can make our solution a bit more efficient. How can we start to reduce the load that RCD boxes are taking? There's certainly a lot of pages, there's certainly a lot of time. So we're going to introduce a CDN. Now, I don't know who was in the last presentation. Hopefully I won't say anything that contradicts what probably said beforehand. But he did a presentation on CDN. I'm going to go over it at a much higher level. So, the first top option we need to decide on when we're picking a CDN is, are we going to go for a full CDN or a push CDN? So a full CDN is something like Azure, and what they do there is when you render your page, rather than rendering the domain of your service, you will put in the domain of your CDN server, and then it might be slashed the path to your URI. What happens then is when the request is made to the CDN for that media item, because it's got it back to me, it then forwards that request back to your server on the first request to get the image itself, and then it caches it. So with a full CDN, it's up to the CDN to fetch data from your server and then serve it to the end user. The reverse of that is a push CDN, which is where, say on a publish, you go, I've got these media items and I'm going to push them to the CDN. Now there are advantages and disadvantages to each one. So, most of the challenges come around expiring content. So with a full CDN, because the CDN has made the decision to grab that information from your server when it needs it, you have a reverse problem. How do I tell that CDN that that content is no longer valid, that I should expire it? There's always a scenario at some point where a content editor accidentally publishes a report that probably shouldn't have gone out. And it's like you now need to get that report back off the CDN. Most CDNs will have someone managing that, but it's worth thinking about. You might need to put in additional processes. Let's say, if I do a publish, that removes someone from the media library. At that point, I should go to the CDN and remove it as well. Another concern is security. Basically, if you push it to a CDN, you have to say this is public data. There probably are some advanced CDNs out there. I think I might be able to do it. Where you can custom implement security in that solution. But I think it's becoming problematic. So if you have content items that require security, media items that require security, it's probably best not to actually push them to a CDN in any way. With the push CDNs, things you need to consider, especially are publishing. Publishing can be very slow. Even with the solution that Lars is suggesting, that's not going to solve your push CDN problem. Because if you need to push that media item to that CDN on every publish, you just have to bite the bullet, and all your content editors are just going to have to wait until that process is completed. Other problems as well, if the push fails or if the push times out, if you've got a lot of content on a very large file, if you're uploading a gigabyte of data, maybe your CDN may go, you've been connected too long, and your publish is taking an hour. I'm cutting my connection. What do you do at that point? With a full CDN, you're probably never going to get broken in until someone. But with a push CDN, there's a potential that you might broken in, it just hasn't made it up there. And that's also true for the delay in getting items onto the CD server. So imagine you've got a page, it's got a load of images on it, you hit publish, maybe your content's gone up, it's live, it's visible, but in the background you've got a process that's now pushing those images up to the CDN. There is going to be a delay between those images being pushed and then becoming live. So again, push CDN may mean that you actually need to preempt what images need to be live. So you push a media item first and then push a content page back. It takes something to do that. Okay. So we've got CDN up there, and because we've got CDN up there, it's being pushed to the end. Our users are now getting content, getting our images really quickly. But now we need to make sure they get our pages really quickly. We want to have geographically distributed data servers. We want to have a set of Sitecore servers in Australia, and a set of Sitecore servers in Europe, and a set in America. So basically what we have to start doing is duplicating our server setups around the world. So probably the best way to do this is to come up with a basic template. So you can see here, I've got a basic template in the blue box. I've got 2 CD servers in there, but you might have 10, 15 CD servers for each of what the traffic is. I've got a session server. We've got an XDB instance. I'll come back to that. That's a special case to do Mongo first replication. We've got SolarBox, we've got WebBox. So the idea is that we want all those services situated close to our CD boxes in that region. We then template that and replicate it through several regions. Again, yeah, it's pretty complicated at this point from the different interactions and connections we've got. And then on the right-hand side, you can see this is my content management environment, which is more like a sort of what we would see in more of a traditional environment. So why do I say that XDB is a special case in terms of how we replicate this out? With Mongo, typically what you're going to be setting up is one live server, which then replicates its data out to the different replication servers. And here you can see we've got one of those replication servers in each of the geographic locations, with the right server being in that content management server instance on the left-hand side. So what we want to do is when our CD servers write to XDB, what they're going to do is they're going to contact the XDB instance in our CN environment, do the write there. But actually, when we want them to read, so when we want to query something about the user profile, they're actually going to read from the XDB instance replica that's in their data center to reduce the traffic. Now, to be aware of, there will be latency in terms of getting the replica set updated in their geographically spatial file. So if you update a contact record, you may see a delay in actually seeing the read come back on the other end once it comes back to the data center. So you have to be aware that there may be latency in that scenario. Okay, so that sort of brings me to the end of my presentation. The idea is hopefully give you an idea of some of the things we've been thinking about. But some things I didn't really mention, which you should also think about when building large-scale solutions, is CI, that whole subject. We spend a day trying to talk about different ways to get CI plans working, especially Sitecore. We've got a lot of options with items and that sort of thing. I talked about one environment, that was the live environment. Now you might need to go away and replicate that 3 or 4 times, depending on the other environments you have. You might have the same setup for your staging environment, because ideally your staging environment should be as close as possible to live. And then you might have a testing environment. And again, that testing environment should still be pretty similar to live. You might have fewer boxes, you might only have it in 2 geographic locations, but you should still try and replicate it as much as possible. One thing we did talk about, especially with the deployment, again, difficulty with the deployment of back-end services. If you're using an e-commerce solution as well, tied into that, you're going to have those distributed names. Third-party services like Twitter, how do you test those? Do you have separate test accounts? What happens when they update their API? How do you update in time with their API as well? As we know, that people want just switch the API, not considered everyone who's using the other API and turning on the services that they sending out the email. The other thing to think about is rollback, which we haven't talked about here. How many people plan for rollback during deployment? Okay, that's good. I know a lot of people now, like, we'll deploy any problems, we'll just keep going forward. We'll try and fix it quickly, because sometimes going backward is too painful like storing zones or storing code. Okay, so summary of things hopefully that you've got to you guys is scaling becomes complex. You know, when we get to the geographically distributed data centers, we're dealing with a lot of servers, a lot of different roles, a lot of replication. We've got to make sure that data gets everywhere. It's going to become a big job. So it's more than just the code. It's one of the things that we tend to focus on a lot at these conferences is what's the best way of writing code. But sometimes you start thinking about the big picture. You need a plan. So when you come to deployment, it's not the case that just wing it. It's just drop some DLLs on the server and hope that nothing breaks. That's not going to work. You know, that's that time quite quickly. Don't underestimate testing. I know as developers, we pretty much all dislike testing. Some of us like unit testing because that's still like coding. But when it comes to writing tests, how many people write tests? Okay. It's really worth writing a test script, you know, just to validate what you think should happen. Test scripts also brilliant because if you're not around and something goes wrong, then you can point somebody out a test script and go, well, you know, try running this and see if it works. You should identify what went wrong. And also, I got finally put aim to say, you know, try and do deployments with zero downtime. I'm surprised there's still a number of development teams who say, oh, we're going to put you on new site life, but you're probably going to have like half an hour outage. To be honest, I don't think they're trying to in this day and age. You know, if Google updates Google Mail and they said to all the Google Mail users, tomorrow morning your mailbox is going to be unavailable for an hour because we're doing an upgrade, everyone would be absolutely livid and just wouldn't accept it. So I don't think we should accept it on projects. Sitecore is a big platform, being a big client, have very couple of people with the website, and that is to try and keep them up as much as possible. Okay, that's the end of my talk. As I think everyone has said before, I'd just like to thank the sponsors. You see their logos up there. Is there a question in the test?
You can have a couple questions if you like.
Yes.
Questions?
We like the exercise.
What do you recommend in that case? Because in your slide you want to show the core database with the membership. In bigger scenarios of numbers, even geographically speaking, for the membership want to work out.
The core database is difficult. Actually, it's very difficult. You can replicate the full database in very basic scenarios, but I really wouldn't recommend it. We had a scenario recently where most people think the main problem with the core database is identity. This is where, say you're publishing your CN box, and an event will get written to the events table. Your CD boxes will then see that event and will then do the cache clearing. So the events table acts as a kind of the messaging system between the CN environment and the CD servers. And the way that the events are tracked is by a timestamp. So basically, the CD box goes. The last time I processed this table was at 10:30. It's now 10:45. I'll see what happens in the last 15 minutes, and I'll process any events like publishing, kids, and that sort of thing. It happens a lot quicker than that, but 15 minutes. What we noticed recently is that if you are dealing with, you've got working installed, and you've got separate CM and CD environments, working instructions tell you to set your CD environments to be remote. And what that actually means is that the CD boxes, rather than processing the working actions on the CD box, those TV boxes actually write to the event table themselves, which is then meant to be picked up by one of the CN environments, or one of the CN boxes, and processed on the CN side. So now you've got your CD boxes trying to push back into the event queue, message back the other way. So the problem we have is that we've replicated the core database, but we only had replication going one way. So we had replication from the CN environment to the CD environment. This meant that all the Woodland events that we pushed in weren't going back and were being missed by the CN box. Unfortunately, nobody noticed this for a while because in that scenario, the Woodland front end doesn't actually tell you anything's gone wrong. You submit your actions, you submit the form says success, but actually behind the scenes it's been black hole. It's just nothing happened, and that data is lost. So you end up having to have like a two-way merge basically on the core database where you have your front end core and back end core trying to merge together, and that just generally doesn't seem to work particularly well. So we actually have to go back and back onto a single core database now, and that works fine. I would try and stick with a single core database. You might want to see if you can do some sort of replication to other environments. But again, it's probably going to end up being a bit like the Mongo scenario, where you have a single write instance of core, but then multiple read instances, and then go back to that.
Right, thank you for explaining this nice and clean. My question is less technical.
Yeah.
So remember your screen there is disaster recovery parameters, which is all time. So what about licenses? Do you need to double licenses taken into account that only one set of services which all at the time?
Well, that, yeah. I'm not a license. Yeah, I'm not a licensed expert, so.
You need to have it, but not as much as
Did everyone hear that? Did everyone hear that response?
Okay, so question regarding publishing instance.
Yeah.
You said in a scaled out environment we have several server roles, but we omitted this one. And I happen to know that this one is a little bit of a tricky one because it can be easily switched or head and parallel. So have you ever tried to have a publishing instance failover or some kind of a scaled out scenario where you can publish, let's say not publish, but failover to another instance if you have access?
No, we haven't tried actually doing a publishing instead of failover. That's a good question. I suppose we would bring up another server and just repeat the publish again, things that are missing. But if you're in the middle of the course of publishing job processing, no, I haven't seen anybody document how that would work, especially if you've got a long publisher. Yeah. Everyone's probably working on instance where publishing the full database will take over an hour, and so that's quite a long time and we could fail. But I have no good solution for that, unfortunately. But does it help?
So XDB is not backwards compatible, and as long as we cannot have more than one binary instance. So my question is, can you operate XDB without downtime?
I'm not, I don't, yeah, I'm going to say you're going to have to refer that to Sitecore. Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I assume you have to run parallel instances and do some sort of live updating of the information as it comes in, because you're still going to have users on the website and want to catch that data. And I think that would end up being custom unless Sitecore develops something. Yeah. It's going to be manual applications. Also, you need to transform, you might need to transform data depending on schemes to change in FTB as well. Yeah, it's not a simple solution. Unfortunately, I don't have that.
Last question. You actually advised to write to one instance with one DB and to read from readiness.
So the question is, does support the outdoor modes and this kind of configuration to do it from one instance and to add another?
Yes, you can. Well, that's actually to do with just basically the Mongo connection strength. So it's not really a cycle thing. You can just set Mongo up to do it that way. And that, yeah, is just primarily just to get your Mongo data that you're reading as close to the CD boxes as possible. So it's not really a cycle thing.
One more question.
No.
How do you recommend replicating it in different
I'll give recommendations and see it together.
Okay, so this was the last breakout session of today. Please start moving into the main area and press finish by giving my good hand.